Today, I'm going to explain a horror film called Bereavement. In 1989, Graham leaves his farmhouse and drives around the schools and neighborhoods in Minersville, Pennsylvania, observing the children as they play and walk to their homes. In the Bristol household, Martin sits on his swing in the yard while his mother talks to a nurse aide about his rare condition. Catherine discloses that Martin is suffering from SIPA, which prevents him from feeling pain. She points out that Martin could get hurt and not realize it, so she tells the aide that she would need to check Martin's body every hour for cuts and bruises. Outside the house, Graham arrives and approaches Martin, saying he has a new bike that his nephew didn't like. When Graham asks Martin if he'd like a new bike, the boy nods, so he invites the boy to his truck. When Catherine looks through the window to call Martin, she gets terrified when she doesn't see the boy in his swing. Catherine panics and quickly runs outside to look around for Martin, but the boy is long gone, riding in Graham's truck on their way back to his house. Later that night, a woman held captive inside a dark basement wakes up and sees Graham dragging a heavy sack. She starts to cry when Graham opens up the sack to reveal a young boy inside. Graham ignores the woman's cries and grabs a knife from the table, telling the boy not to be afraid. He proceeds to cut Martin's face, but the boy doesn't flinch. The woman starts screaming in terror when Graham approaches her, holding a much longer knife. Graham pulls a rope to lift the woman higher and butchers her as she continues wailing in fear and agony. Martin manages to run outside as the heavy rains pour, but Graham catches up to him and brings him back inside. 5 years later, Jonathan drives to the bus stop to pick up his 17-year-old niece, Allison, who recently lost her parents in an accident. Upon reaching home, Jonathan's daughter, Wendy, excitedly greets Allison. She constantly bugs Allison with questions about her athletic routines while her mother, Karen, takes Allison to her room. Karen tells her that she'll be sleeping in Wendy's room until Jonathan finishes remodeling the den. Elsewhere in town, Melissa walks to her car after finishing her shift at the diner. Before she could drive off, Graham blocks her way with his truck and waits until she gets down from her car. When Melissa confronts him, Graham knocks her to the ground and takes her into his vehicle. He drives back home and takes her to the abandoned slaughterhouse. While Graham ties up the frightened woman, Martin peeks through the gaps on the wall to watch him. Melissa soon learns that she's not alone when another woman starts whispering to her. Melissa keeps crying for help, but the other woman has totally lost all hope of being rescued and tells Melissa that they're going to die soon. When the woman asks her what day it is, Melissa starts screaming, realizing that she has lost track of time. When Elysian goes for a jog one day, she comes across the slaughterhouse and sees Martin standing by a window, but the boy hides as soon as he sees Allison looking in his direction. Martin continues watching Allison from the window as she goes on her way, not noticing that his hand is bleeding from a cut. When he turns around, Graham grabs his shoulder, warning him that his curiosity could kill him. As Allison continues her jog on the main road, she almost gets hit by a truck and falls on the side of the road. William, who has been observing her from his yard, rushes over to her to help and offers her a ride home after learning that she sustained a minor leg injury. Allison hesitates, but she eventually agrees, knowing that her house is still a few miles away. However, Allison instantly regrets her decision when she learns that William is going to make her ride on his motorcycle. William goads her by suggesting that she's faint-hearted, so Allison decides to get on the bike to show him otherwise. On the way, William introduces himself and asks Allison how she ended up in Minersville. Allison reluctantly tells William that he came to live with her uncle because both her parents died in an accident. When they arrive at the house, Allison takes off William's helmet and hands it back to him, but William tells her to keep it because she'll need it again. Jonathan, who's working on an extension to the house, is not too happy about seeing William and Allison together, but he doesn't say a word to her. At the slaughterhouse, Graham leads Martin to the room where he keeps the captives, telling him how he used to slaughter cattle back in the day. While picking a knife from the table, Graham explains that the male cattle often run in panic from the smell of fear and blood, so they have to cut off their hind legs. Melissa starts to whimper as Graham puts on his apron and walks to the next room. The other woman squeals in agony and terror as Graham starts stabbing her. He instructs Martin to hold the woman still, but the boy runs away. However, Graham catches up to Martin as he stares in fascination and fear at a human-like figure with the skull of a bull. Graham talks to the effigy, saying everything is under control, before taking the boy away to lock him up in a small chamber. Later, Graham boils a pot of water and pours it over his hand, but he doesn't flinch even as the hot water burns through his skin. On their way to school the next morning, Allison sees the slaughterhouse as they drive along the road, so she asks Jonathan about it and mentions that she saw a boy there when she was jogging. Jonathan tells her that it's a meatpacking plant that's been abandoned long ago. He notes that Graham was forced by his father to work there day and night, so he never went to school. It closed down because they can no longer afford to upgrade the equipment to keep up with the government standards. When they arrive at the school, Jonathan tells Allison that he'll be back by 2:30 to pick her up. Meanwhile, Graham takes the boy out of the chamber to give him a sponge bath. After dressing him up, Graham embraces the boy, telling him that he envies his serenity and leaves him to clean up the blood from the walls. At the school, Allison talks to the gym teacher to ask about their track team, but the teacher informs her that the only extracurricular activity available for girls is the cheerleading squad. She watches the squads practice for a while, but she eventually gets bored, so she leaves the school. On the road, she sees Graham's truck following her, but the truck goes on its way when she stops walking. While Jonathan waits for her at the school entrance, Allison stops by William's house and sees him fixing his car. Allison tries chatting with him, but she decides to leave, seeing that he's busy. Jonathan tries to ask her out on a date, but his father, Ted, calls out to him in a distressed voice. When he gets inside the house, he finds out that his father has fallen from his wheelchair. Allison follows him inside and helps William. William introduces Allison to Ted, telling him that he's from Chicago. Ted tells her bluntly that he hates Chicago and makes crude jokes about his son, so Allison decides to leave. On the way home, Allison passes by the slaughterhouse and looks at the windows to see if the boy is around. The boy is nowhere to be seen, but Allison sees Graham standing on the pathway to the house. Inside, Melissa tries talking to Martin as he scrubs the walls, but the boy doesn't respond. Graham enters the room, wondering why the cattle run in fear if they don't have feelings. He then takes a knife from the table and prepares to cut Martin's arm. Melissa pleads for him to stop and tells the boy to run, but they both ignore her. After leaving a laceration, Graham turns to Melissa and tells her that Martin's conscience is unburdened. When Allison gets home, Jonathan scolds her for not being at the school when he came to pick her up. After she issues a half-hearted apology, Jonathan warns her not to do it again. Later that night, Melissa wakes up and sees Martin in front of her with no sign of Graham. Melissa begs Martin to cut him loose, promising to help the boy get away, so Martin grabs a knife from the table and slowly approaches Melissa. In another room, Graham writes about his murders in a journal and talks to the effigy. He begs it to make his torment stop, noting that he has done everything that it asked. Melissa soon makes her way out of the slaughterhouse, but Graham finds out about her escape when she screams in terror after running into the effigy. Melissa comes across a gate that leads outside, but she couldn't open it. When Graham emerges on the other side, she hides behind a garbage bin holding a metal rod. After Graham passes her by, she tries hitting him from behind with the rod, but he fends off the attack. After hitting Melissa in the head, Graham hooks her leg to a chain and hangs her upside down. As she screams and struggles for her life, Graham pulls the chain to take her to the furnace and sets her ablaze. After shutting the furnace, Graham berates Martin for letting the woman escape. Graham warns Martin that the unknown entities represented by the effigies can no longer trust the boy, so Martin has to make it up to them. Graham goes to the attic and talks to a body hidden below a sheet, saying the figure is responsible for all the tragedies that happened at the plant. To his shock, he sees the body moving, so he closes his eyes for a while before looking at it again. He leaves the attic after perceiving that it's not moving at all. When Allison goes for a jog after school, William sees her on the road and offers her a ride in his car. Allison warns him that she couldn't stay out late, so William jokes that he'll take her home by Monday. William takes her to a diner and opens up about his family. He reveals that her mother died of pneumonia a few years ago, and his father lost the use of his legs in an accident in Chicago. After dinner, William takes Allison to an abandoned drive-in theater where Allison opens up about what happened to her family. She discloses that her parents died in an accident as they were driving home for dinner one night. They were only a mile away from their house when they were hit by an SUV that ignored a stop sign. Tears start flowing from Allison's eyes, lamenting that her life was destroyed in a blink of an eye. As William and Allison start making out, a truck pulls up nearby. The two teenagers kiss passionately, oblivious to the man approaching the car. Jonathan suddenly appears and asks Allison to get out of the car. Despite Allison's protests, Jonathan takes her home, advising her not to hang out with William anymore. He explains that he and her dad vowed to take care of each other's children if something happens to either of them, and he wants to keep his promise. Jonathan hints that he wouldn't be able to stop Allison if she wants to live on her own. Although he doesn't want Allison to leave, Jonathan tells her to make a choice. Allison decides to stay with him, so he tells her that she'll have to live by his rules for a while. Graham manages to abduct another woman, so he wakes up Martin late at night, asking the boy to assist him. As the woman begs for her life, Graham hands the boy the knife, telling him to stab her. But the boy refuses, so Graham tells Martin to hold the woman to keep her from swinging. When Graham starts stabbing the woman, her blood flows to Martin's face as he holds on tight to her body. Her screams echo through the halls of the abandoned slaughterhouse, but no one's there but Martin and Graham to hear her. Later on, Graham dunks Martin's head on a dirty bathtub to wash the blood off his face. Graham suddenly notices a shadow approaching them, so he yells at the mysterious figure, saying he's no longer afraid. The figure turns to leave as Graham continues yelling. At the break of dawn, Martin escapes and runs through the fields, but he comes across the effigy of a dead bull. When the dead bull's skull turns to face him, Martin wakes up in the dark, realizing that he had a nightmare. Allison decides to pack her bags the next day, but Karen stops by her room to convince her to stay. Karen tells Allison that Jonathan will soon learn to trust her if she gives him a chance. Karen points out that Jonathan is warier of William than her, so Allison asks why Jonathan is disdainful of him. Karen notes that William has been dealing with a lot of problems in his family. She reveals that William's mother didn't die of pneumonia, as William had claimed, but had taken her own life. William was traumatized from discovering her body hanging in the garage, so the doctors put him on a lot of medication. Karen tells Allison that William has run into trouble around town since then, so Jonathan is worried that he might be unstable. Before Karen could finish explaining Jonathan's apprehensions about William, Allison leaves and heads straight to William's house to apologize for what happened the previous night. Allison discloses that she knows what happened to her mother, noting that she understands because she knows how it's like to lose someone. Ted overhears the conversation and confronts Allison for talking about William's mother, lamenting that the woman abandoned them. William tries to calm his father down, but Ted gets even more exasperated, so Allison decides to leave. William berates his father for being rude, saying he'll end up alone if he pushes William too far. On her way home, Allison passes by the slaughterhouse and sees Martin by the window. However, the boy runs as soon as she talks to him, so Allison decides to look for him. As she walks toward the building, Allison sees Graham's truck leaving, so she hides behind the bushes and waits until he's gone before she continues searching for Martin. When Allison gets inside, she sees Martin waiting by the door, but he runs down to the basement before she could reach him. Martin leads her through the slaughterhouse until she comes across a grisly room where Graham keeps his journal. When Allison opens the book, she finds news clippings of girls who went missing with their personal items attached to the pages. On another page, she sees a news clip about Martin's disappearance and concludes that the boy she's been following is Martin. A note next to the news clip says Graham brought Martin home with the intention of teaching the boy his profession. Graham points out that the boy doesn't talk much, thinking he's either scared or stupid. As Allison continues to search for Martin, Graham arrives. When Allison finally catches up to him, she asks the boy to come with her, but the boy cowers in fear upon seeing somebody behind her. Graham then grabs Allison and knocks her out with a metal rod. As it gets darker outside, Jonathan starts worrying about Allison, but Karen tells him she's probably just blowing off some steam. Allison, however, is screaming in terror inside the slaughterhouse after regaining consciousness with her hands tied up. The following day, Karen informs Jonathan that Allison didn't come home the previous night. As Jonathan prepares to look for her, he comes across William standing at their front door looking for Allison. William discloses that they had a fight, but he thought that she went straight home. Blaming William for Allison's disappearance, Jonathan shoves William to the ground and tells him to stay away from her. Jonathan decides to stop by Graham's farmhouse after failing to find Allison elsewhere. Upon hearing Jonathan's voice outside, Allison yells for help as loud as she can, but Graham gags her. As Jonathan turns to leave, Graham finally answers the door. Jonathan asks him if he came across his niece, but Graham claims he hasn't seen her. When Jonathan mentions that Allison had seen a boy wandering around, Graham tells him to get off the property. When Jonathan asks if he could come inside, Graham tells him to wait. Jonathan hears Allison yelling for help, but Graham shoots him before he could make a move. After making sure that Jonathan is dead, Graham unties Allison and drags her to a walk-in freezer. Meanwhile, William is on his way home riding his motorcycle, but he notices Jonathan's truck by the farmhouse, so William decides to stop by to find out if he found Allison. After looking around outside, William enters the house and goes down to the basement. Inside the freezer, Allison starts to shiver from the low temperature, so she takes a sheet covering up a large piece of meat on a table. However, she is horrified to discover the corpse underneath, so she covers up the dead body and screams for help. She sees Martin standing in front of the door, so he cries out to him for help, but he turns away and leaves her screaming. Soon, William reaches the walk-in freezer and sees Allison, but he couldn't open the door because it's locked. As he tries to break the padlock, Allison sees Graham approaching, so she tries to warn William. He manages to break the lock and loosen the chains, but Graham hits him in the head with a shovel. Allison cries in despair and terror as Graham continues smashing William's head. While Graham washes his face, he starts hearing the voice of the bull's skull on the wall. He argues with the imaginary entity, telling it to leave Martin alone because he needs the boy to help him clean up the mess at the slaughterhouse. Soon, he gets infuriated and smashes the bull's skull with an axe, but when he looks at the wall, the skull is still hanging there with no signs of damage. Graham approaches Martin in the kitchen and castigates him for his lack of emotion. Graham desperately tries reading the boy's mind and his frustration. Graham stabs the boy's hand with a knife, pinning it to the table. Graham then leaves the boy, telling him not to cause any trouble while he's gone. Later on, Allison notices a hole in the freezer door, so she tries inserting a metal rod through the hole to unlock it. After she manages to open the door, she goes straight up to find her way out of the house. But when she reaches the door leading outside, she sees Martin in the kitchen with a knife pinning his hand to the table. She pulls the knife out and wraps the boy's hand with a piece of cloth before carrying him out of the house. On her way out of the farmhouse, Allison sees the effigy and knocks it down to show Martin that he shouldn't be afraid of it. As Wendy and Karen wait for Jonathan and Allison to return, Graham arrives on Jonathan's truck. Graham knocks on the door and attacks Karen as soon as she opens it. Karen immediately runs back to the kitchen, telling Wendy to run as Graham tries to subdue her. Karen tries to get her hands on a knife, but Graham knocks it over the floor. Wendy screams as she watches her mom struggle to break free from Graham. Karen urges her to run, so she decides to lock herself up in her room. Karen reaches for the knife on the floor as she struggles, but Graham gets a hold of it first and uses it to stab her in the chest. Wendy sits by the door in tears as she hears her mother's horrifying scream. A few moments later, Graham drags Jonathan's body inside the house and sets the curtains on fire. He then takes a cleaver from the floor and heads to Wendy's bedroom. Wendy hears her dog Randy whimpering outside the door, so she opens it to take the dog inside. She quickly goes back inside and shuts the door after she sees Graham approaching. Graham forces the door open and walks toward Wendy, but he stops and drops the cleaver after hearing her plead for her pets' lives. Graham hints that he also had a pet that ate from his hand. He tells Wendy that his pet trusted him unconditionally, but he was forced to kill it. Allison eventually reaches Jonathan's house, still carrying the boy in her arms. When she gets inside, she's terrified to see the living room in flames. She looks for Karen in the kitchen, only to find that she's seriously hurt. Karen tells her not to let Graham hurt Wendy, so she grabs a knife and goes to her room, leaving Martin in the kitchen. Graham decides to take Wendy with him back to the farmhouse, but Allison arrives and stabs him in the back. Allison stabs him again when he turns around. After Graham flees, Allison goes back down to find Martin, leaving Wendy alone in her room. When she gets back to the kitchen, she finds out that Karen is already dead. Allison calls the police and continues to look for Martin, but she gets stabbed when she opens a bloodstained door. As she writhes in pain on the floor, Martin comes out and continues stabbing Allison until she stops screaming. Martin gets up and heads to Wendy's room as Allison succumbs from her injuries. Wendy shrieks in fear upon seeing Martin with a knife, but there's no one else alive in the house to hear her. Graham returns to the farmhouse and heads to the attic to talk to the figure beneath the sheets. He tells the figure that he now understands why the cattle run when they're hurt. Graham stresses that even dumb animals have the capacity to realize when they've been betrayed. He then points out that the figure didn't run when he was killed because he didn't feel betrayed at all. Graham suddenly hears Martin approaching him, but before he could turn around, the boy hits him with an axe. Graham thanks Martin as he lifts the axe to hit him once more and cries out in pain as the axe lands on his chest, causing his blood to burst. Martin continues hacking at his body until he finally dies. In the morning, firefighters find 4 charred bodies inside Jonathan's house. They don't bother to look for evidence of any other crime, thinking that the family perished in the fire. Ted looks for William in his room but doesn't find him there, so he decides to wait for him by the door. Inside the slaughterhouse, Martin constructs a new effigy on the wall using the skeletal of the figure in the attic. He stands by the window of the slaughterhouse contemplating how he would follow in Graham's footsteps. Graham felt sympathy for the animals being slaughtered at the meat processing plant, but his father had convinced him that the animals don't feel any emotions at all. His mind seems to have snapped when he was forced to kill a cattle that he had considered as a pet. Soon, he starts hearing voices in his head that order him to slaughter human beings, treating them like cattle. He kidnaps Martin and teaches him to slaughter, and he succeeds. It leads to his own demise, but he expresses his gratitude towards Martin as the boy slaughters him because he considers it as a form of redemption for betraying the pet who trusted him.